This is Richard Wolff responding to another Ask Prof. Wolff question from our Patreon community. And this one comes from Dr. Richard Rohrer, who asks a very important question that is, however, rarely asked. He wonders what will happen or what plans might exist for the time when the Earth cannot sustain a growing population, when, in other words, we've come to the peak of the population our planet can sustain. And then what? What happens? Now, in fact, in my 10 years of Ivy League economics training, no one ever asked that question. No professor ever brought it up, and no student asked about it either. And I think it's a fair statement to say that in general, the economics profession acts as if that weren't a relevant question. Even during the period of the last years, when ecological, environmental concerns have brought home very clearly that the economics profession and the economy itself have dangerously neglected all of the environmental and ecological implications of economic development over recent centuries, if not further back as well. So let me try to offer an answer. Capitalism is a very particular system that is different from slavery and feudalism and other earlier systems in a number of ways, but one of which is this system of competing enterprises, each of whom is driven by the competition they're locked into maximizing their profits. Why? Because the maximum profit is both your best defense and your best offense in a competitive situation. It's worth briefly explaining. If you are more profitable than your competitors, you will be able to buy the latest technology. You will be able to maybe cut the price of your output, driving customers to leave your competitors and buy from you instead. In short, the more profits you have, the more opportunities you are to defeat your competitors. And by the same logic, the less profit you earn, the more vulnerable you become to the competitive efforts of your competitors. The rule is therefore clear, and it has become one of the central propositions of economics. Profit maximization is the urgent, desperate necessity for capitalist corporations, so long as a competitive environment exists, which, even if it doesn't now, will eventually, and therefore the same logic applies. The next point in the argument goes like this. One of the ways you maximize profit is to grow your business, even if the technology remains the same. The more people you can hire, the more machines you can buy for them to work with, the more profit you'll have at any given moment. And even if you can't use that profit in some competitive way right now to hurt your competing companies, you can reinvest it in your own business, grow it, hire a few more people, therefore make more profits next year compared to this, and then be that much stronger next year for both defensive and offensive purposes. In short, capitalism is a growth system. It depends on growth. It fosters growth. It needs growth. It's driven to growth. But what happens when the capitalist who has to grow, who has to compete by making more profit, runs out of workers? In other words, we've reached that point that the question asks us about. The competing capitalists looking to hire, coming up against a workforce that isn't growing, will have only one way to get more workers, and that is by bidding them away from another employer who already has them. And the way to do that is to raise wages. But if you raise wages, you cut profits. A contradiction. Marx loves these contradictions. In Section 7 of Volume 1 of Capital, something called the General Law of Capitalist Accumulation, he talks about these situations in a region or an area or an industry that comes up against the limit of available workers. He pointed out and showed how when that happens, they bring immigrants in from elsewhere. They turn to technology that will allow them, at least for a while, to replace workers with machines until the same logic kicks in and they're back facing the problem. Marx didn't ask himself either the question, what happens when we're talking about the planet as a whole? And the answer is, I think, that this contradiction between the system's growth imperative and the limited population will eventually collapse it, as the very things they need to do to raise their profits, which they must, undercut their profits by driving up wages. For me, that's yet another way that capitalism self-destructs. If these responses are of interest to you, give me 10 seconds to simply say what you already know. We need your help to pay for all of this, to support the people that work with me, to cover the costs. We are reaching more and more people. We need your help to continue to do that. If you can, please do.